it and understand it, that evolved, it's really evolved over a long period of time, and it's a sort of a cultural thing, and it is largely part of the industrial age, actually. It's a sort of romanticism that we have that was developed when industry started tearing up the land with railroads and putting smoke in the sky, and that whole great economic leap forward developed the whole romantic period, and it still is how we see place. In fact, the word landscape is still felt to mean only beautiful places and rural beautiful places. That's a part of that romantic feel. So this is the beginning of the book. It's rather different. The windows of the mill are dark, but I have seen the works inside. The 2 pair of millstones fluted for gristing, the sifters, the shuckers, the hoppers, the conveyors, the belts, and the pulleys, and the cast iron turbine. Thinking of them, I become aware of the mill works of thought and feeling in me. The grist mill is just across the road from my cottage. It's a big wooden structure, 3 stories, painted in an old red, reaching down the bank to the stream. Just by the mill is a dam. From inside my cottage, I hear the steady sound of the falls going over the dam. The mill was built in 1880, replacing another that burned. Its geometry is time softened, but it still carries itself with an air of prosperity and confidence. A little ways upstream in the woods, a long-stepped natural falls comes over a ledge high above and down through a gorge. At the bottom of the falls, the stone foundations of another mill, half collapsed and mossy, are disappearing in the woods, rooms half filled with drifts of fallen leaves. Compared to the grist mill, these ruins convey a cramped, hard-rested quality. But this was a big wooden mill, also 3 stories, where felt was produced. Felt made from sheep's wool was used in the production of paper and became the great industry of the village. The gnarly little mountains around here are good for sheep. When the woolen mill was in operation, a plume siphoned water from the top of the falls down to the mill, and at the bottom, down to the mill at the bottom, a descent of 100 feet into the mill, into the turbine, inside of which was a small wheel of vanes turned by the concentrated water powering the works. Once even the pitching land around the gorge was pasture. Now all the slopes that enclose the village are wooded. From the grist mill, the village tumbles downhill above a small widening floodplain. Along the tumbling stream. A reproduction of a print that I bought at the Historical Society, which now occupies the grist mill, is taped to the wall above the bathtub in my cottage. It shows the floodplain in the 19th century busy with industry, largely lumbering, big tree trunks, some strewn about, some stacked. You can tell it was noisy and dirty. The work of agrarian times was not always as peaceful as we like to imagine. Indeed, there were once 5 mills along the stream. Today, people get upset if a tiny business opens in the village, as if that would ruin its historical character. Midway down Main Street are townhouse-style attached dwellings that were once lived in by merchants who ran shops at street level. Some houses along the way are substantial. The village is small, and yet there was substance here, reflecting a time when wealth and political power was in land, those pastures full of grazing sheep whose wool could be turned into felt. When wealth is in the land, then the countryside is less context, more the main thing. It's a spread out scene, decentered, continuous, yet with nodes, like a painting by Kandinsky. That land wealth gave even a small settlement like the village importance. Other houses are farmhouse-sized with barns in the back. Others are tiny. Downstream, where Main Street gets steep, sundry houses and cottages are attached to one another to comical effect, as if to keep from falling beyond the last houses. The stream turns into a small valley of fields where it quiets.
can't quite see that from the moon.
No.
Gotta get back down the ground again. I would ask some more questions, but I think the thing to do right now really is to turn it to the room. I know my students have been reading the book and may have some questions about what they've been reading. Others, you can ask questions about the journalism parts of this, and I'm sure that Suzannah would even entertain a few Manhattanville questions if you have those.
When you have an eye for all of these different details, and then you get all of these details down, how do you select what are the best choice cuts?
Actually, we didn't have iPhones for some of the reporting I did with this, but I found that photographing things actually isn't a good idea. I mean, it's not useful. It's okay to have it for fact checking later, to have it, but I find that it's better to go and look and observe and take notes, and then go home and look at your notes and remember, and then work with that and begin circling the ones that have some feeling about them. And that if I have the photograph of Youngstown, photograph after photograph of decaying houses, whatever, I'm looking at them, I don't know, it sort of kills the process of moving on from the experience and beginning to turn it into writing.
So don't write from pictures, write from...
Well, sometimes all we have is pictures.
Right.
Like sometimes if you're writing about a relative who died, a great-great-grandfather, of course, then all you have is a picture. But we actually, that's different too, because we live in this time where there's just sort of an infinite amount of photographs and pictures. It's this data thing where before, when you had to build up from an empty page, like that's what you're working, and this is true in architecture too, like you used to begin to design on an empty page and try to build up from nothing. Now we have to build down from everything. And these iPhone pictures we can take, which are just, you can take as many as you want, and we're sort of awash in them. It's actually building down from that we have to do. And so the record, of course it's important as a record for all sorts of things, not a bad technology, but I find that for, the process of writing and reporting is selection. And the instrument of selection of our memory and our notes and our writing is, I think, more powerful, actually works more efficiently than to return to the photographs. It's like going back to stage one. Okay, I'm going to look at everything. So that's just me. It's my process.
So a way of describing your process might be that if you have a camera that's settings are like, focus on everything,
Right.
as opposed to the memory of an experience is a selective focus based on your understanding of the experience, and the details that are going to come to you in writing are not all of that, but the stuff that your mind has already filtered to what it needs in a way.
In a way, but also, like, if you're there and you're writing your notes about the houses, if you photograph them, that interrupts that. Like you're looking with your eyes and you're writing what you see, and then taking a photograph is a whole different thing, and it's sort of it's an art, you're not trying to create art there, but now you're doing something very different. You're looking at the thing on the screen, you're trying to frame it right, it looks different on the screen, you're just totally pulled out of your process. I still say do it, but I never look at them. I don't look at them. I've got, a lot of the beginning of the work we're still printing. I've got these wads of, photographs of various places I went. I never looked at them because even looking at them at home, I might have wanted to for fact check reasons. And in fact, that's really important. I really think that's a process thing, and it really is different, and I think it depends on the project too. And that there could be projects where that is really important to do. Like I'm going to Venice, and I'm interested in the fact that Venice is infested with tourists. And I want to sit in St. Mark's and feel what that is. And I'm going to write that, I'm not going to photograph it. But I will see it. You know, like, I am sure, and I can't quite think what it would be, that there are reportorial things where you want to photograph.
Good question. More questions? Incidentally, I'm the same way about journals. I think journaling is super important, but I never read them. I mean, the process of writing in the journal probably does something for my process of understanding stuff, but very rarely do I go back to those notes.
See, everybody, that's right, there's my gold line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the process is different. Yeah, Taylor.
Yeah, the one thing that really interests me about nonfiction
Yeah.
is the outlining process.
Yeah.
I think for most people, it's incredibly detailed and it's a laborious sort of endeavor to plan out all the different areas of your book that you're going to touch on that reflect reality. Could you talk to us about your outlining process, how you began your book and how you kept it going?
I don't outline. The fact is, if you're writing a book, as opposed to, say, a piece that can be read in one sitting, you've got to have a structure, because it's like blue water sailing. You're outside land, and the reader's outside land too, and they need that feeling. This book is going somewhere. Otherwise, okay, I read a little bit, but I will stop. You know, I mean, it's not particularly. So that is a big thing. I actually had to learn the hard way. But I don't outline. I don't find that it works. I get my elements out on the table. And I like to, this is actually a process I learned from John McVie. It's when you've done your reporting, that you put all the things that interest you, but little items, it's like getting to the cellular part. And some things could just be those red socks, or, you know, some little thing, and another thing could be something really important. And you have like a whole bunch all over the table of these little cards, and then you start moving them around and some want to go together. And you begin to get clusters, and you begin to get constellations. And then you begin to see a sort of deeper configuration beneath your material. And it's really important to find that. The configuration that's going to reveal your material the way you want to. It's doing two things for you doing this. It's first doing this rather sort of superficial but important thing, which is simply giving the book a momentum, giving the reader a feeling that there's engineering here and it's going somewhere, it's organized. They don't have to worry where the book is going, even if they don't know in that particular moment. That's like terribly important for all books. But the other is finding what this material really is, and that's using yourself. It's like for you in a certain way, but not for you as a memoirist, just for you as someone figuring this thing out, because you're the writer. And like McVie doesn't put himself in, it's not remotely memoirs, but he's a brilliant arranger. And it's not at all, it's often quite counterintuitive or not what you would expect. I'm more that way. I had a hell of a time with this, just really. And because first I thought it would work as an unfold, as a quest, you know, and because I did a tremendous amount of reporting. It's not all in the book. I thought the reporting was going to be the book, but it was actually my education. And when I did it just as reporting, I didn't think I was going to be in the book or anything. I also had this terrible problem that the world kept changing. So the ground kept going out from under you. It was a nightmare, the whole thing. And then finally, I realized that actually I learned a lot doing all my reporting, and I learned that every place was fundamentally governed by the same things. But that when you know a place well, actually you can get to this strange transformation that's happening more quickly because you know the place. Like you go to a place you don't know, you have to go through all the surface stuff and find out all the history and it actually takes a long time to get down to the bottom. But once you seeing what the phenomenon is, then you see, because I found I was just doing that in my mind about the places I knew. And I thought, well, you don't want that in the book, forget it. And it ended up having to be grounded in places I knew well. The 3 parts each are grounded in those places that could not stabilize till then. And then this kind of wildly disparate thought patterns that go out were held. They could be held by, and the place you know well in the present, like there had to be, because the present is always the same. If you read about 1836 sitting under a tree somewhere, it's the present, and you know what it is, it's the same. So the present and the places I knew became the anchor. So then that became the structure. I don't know if that answers your question. But
That's a master
It's a
class.
profound question, and it's a fun question. It's a fun thing.
Figuring out that puzzle is kind of the joy of writing.
Oh, it's just right.
That's what it
It's
is.
terrifying.
Yeah, and terrifying. The joy and the terror.
Yeah.
How about one last question? Sam, there you go.
Okay, so it's like a comment that turns into a question.
Yeah.
So it's like about like our relationship with architecture, things we've built, and then our relationship with landscape. So say like when Notre Dame was burning and people were praying, people were devastated, people donated money. No one was hurt, but it was the building, the history, the religion of it that people were devastated about. And then say like the ocean's polluted or a forest is on fire, you don't hear about people praying for that, and it's not as devastating it seems.
Right.
Do you think we prioritize the things we've built, or do you think it's just harder for us to understand and appreciate the landscape, whether because we don't understand it fully, we didn't make it? What do you think the relationship is there?
Well, that goes to the whole issue of imagining our world as it really is. When I actually think that burning of Notre Dame still means it. I don't know that we've completely understood how it resonated in our time and what that might reveal about our time. But leaving that aside, it just was what it was. It was a terrible thing that happened in an ancient artifact, which represents man. It's sort of like very much just unbelievably beautiful creation that had been passed down. Whereas I think with the fires and things we're having now, that we, it's in certain ways the idea that the meaning of landscape has changed drastically is most obvious with respect to nature, because the idea of nature is something beyond us and God given from, that was given, that's providential, that's there, that's bigger than we are, that produced us. And layered on top of that, that's transcendent. And layered on top of that, that represents purity and innocence, all those things that go with that doesn't work at all anymore. What it is something it is our reward. We are stewards of it, and we don't know how to be stewards. We're failing. So when you get these fires, they're unbearable. In a way, Notre Dame isn't. Notre Dame is a disaster, but those fires, we don't even know how to think about them. Like when you have a real natural disaster now that wasn't, and they're actually getting harder to find because the hurricanes are affected by climate change. Now they say earthquakes are affected by fracking, but there still are some things that just are natural. If you get a natural disaster, it's almost a relief. Like you feel, it's the old relationship. Nature got big and wild, and we need to go in there and be heroic and help people. And it's like, phew, what a natural. And even though people may have died, and it just feels like we know how to think about that. But this new thing, we're so fascinated by the wild and looking at, people. We have all these books by people going into the wild and being up against nature and failing, or like The Perfect Storm, when there was a captain, a woman who was the captain of a boat who made it through the storm. Oh, we don't want to hear that story. No, tell us about the story of the boat that went down, because it makes us feel that. Because it's still that huge transcendent nature that's so much bigger than us. So that's where I would go. We don't know how to feel about the virus. other than, we just don't. They just are in the, now, you know, the Amazon and then now Indonesia. We haven't worked a response out. I think it's really important to work that out. And this is where writing comes in. Not the investigative stuff or who started the fire, what the policy of this place or that place, but how do you imagine it and think about it? Because I don't think you get a political response till that's happened. Till we deeply understood our situation. I see us as having gone into a new era, as post-industrial. When industrialism happened, you came out of the agrarian age when people lived off the land. It was and industrialism happened, people didn't know how to think about it. It was very obvious the way this change isn't so obvious in a lot of ways because it's invisible what the computer does, and the landscape a lot of times isn't changed. But they didn't know how to think about it. No one had seen cities of the size that was happening as everybody left the country and went to the city. The ideas of obligations between people, everything changed in society. There's this book that came out by Thomas Piketty, I think a year ago, that's this great big tome on capitalism. I think it's called Capitalism. And it was sort of a big deal. Everybody read about it, what's happening with capitalism now. And he says in the beginning of that book, I'm doing this because we have so much more data that we can revisit the question, does capitalism self-destruct or can it move toward a more equal society? And we have all that data, but let me tell you, the data I have is nothing compared to what the novelists of the 19th century gave us about the beginnings of industrial capitalism, which is so immense because it went down into the details of life. It took on all the different levels of life. And so it's Dickens and Balzac and Dreiser. They are the ones, and it's on that. You had to have that before you got liberal reform. They got the kids out of the factories, they got the smoke not going into the air, they began to civilize what was going on. And I think it's nonfiction now that can do that. The novel isn't doing that. It's going inward. It's a whole different thing. And nonfiction is burgeoning out. And it should be ambitious. It should be, if you feel like being ambitious, you don't have to be ambitious. And as a matter of fact, some tiny little thing can add to that. It's not like you take on the big subject, like you just write about any subject, but you write about it in that really curious way. You're opening that up. Where are we now? What's going on? What is the world? What is our relation to it and to each other in it? What is this world? We need to understand that before we can take charge of the world.
That's great. I am pulling out the rug from under the plan here because there was one last section of the book that we were going to read, but here we are, and it's time to shift to the two things we have remaining to do, which are buy some books and have them signed, and finish all the food on the table in the back of the room. So our attention is going to shift in the direction of the food table and the book table, please. Remember that writing is amazing and we all want to be great writers, but if nobody's ever buying any books, then what's the point?
It's a big issue.
It's for real, it's real. But before you turn your attention to those tables, let's thank Suzannah Lessard for like to ask them in an informal way, so thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here.